Welcome, guys, to episode 8 of the relationship series. I'm here today with Ian Watson. Ian has worked in the field of natural health and self-transformation for the last 26 years, and he was a co-founder and director of a homeopathic training school until 2003, and he's had a lifelong interest in psychology and spirituality. Since then, he's come across some principles which, for him, provided the missing link and are a simple, practical and accessible approach that enable people to reconnect with their true nature and realise their full potential. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Kush. It's great to be here.
So we met, I think, last year for the first time. We were on a course with Dickon Bettinger, who was on a previous episode, and there was just something about you. I think we connected very quickly, and there was just kind of a sense of almost like I felt like I'd known you for I guess a lot longer than just a few hours.
Yeah, I remember the day that we spent, and I remember meeting you, and it's true. It was the same immediate, nice, friendly connection, an easy connection. So, which was nice. It's like recognizing kindred spirits, I think. Indeed.
So let's just start off with a little bit about yourself. You know, if you could tell the audience kind of a bit more. We've done the blurb, but who you are and what you do, and
sure.
and kind of how you've got to being on this call tonight, in a way.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, my work all my life and my interest really has been in natural healing mostly, and also what I would call personal transformation. And the two kind of were always intertwined for me, but the early part of my career was, as you mentioned, in homeopathy. So I was working with a lot of people's health problems, health issues. You know, people would come along who the doctors couldn't help, who were looking for something outside of the mainstream. And what I found when I worked with people over time is that they would often then, you know, if they got help with one thing, they'd often come with something else. And quickly, I would find myself out of my own depth in terms of what my training had prepared me for, because people would come, for example, asking for help with things like their relationships with their spouse or with people at work, or problems they were having with the children, or problems the children were having at school, which, you know, was really outside of my field of expertise. But it was good because it set me on a process of trying to learn more about how people work and what is it that's really helpful in these areas. And I think I was simultaneously looking for things to help the people I was working with, and also looking for things to help me in my own life. You know, the two, I could see very clearly that there was often a mirror between what people were struggling with who I was working with, and also what I was struggling with in my own life. It was frequently variations on the same themes. So there was a personal interest as well on my part. You could say, you know, I was getting paid to essentially do my own research on how to have a nicer life.
And there's probably a number of ways that it has impacted you, but I'd love to hear some of the examples of some of the more poignant things and I guess especially bearing in mind that the topic around relationships, how that impacted your relationships, and if you've got any examples of that.
Sure. I think, you know, what's surprising to me when I look back is how all the things that I learned, and I learned a lot of things that had to do with emotional healing. Once I moved on from the homeopathy, I was looking primarily in the realm of working with unconscious beliefs. I made a big study of Jungian psychology. I spent a long period of time analysing dreams, both my own and other people. I was looking into what it is that causes us to hold on to trauma, you know, past traumas that have impacted on people's lives, and how it is that we can let go of certain things and we seem to get stuck with other things. So I was learning and practicing a variety of techniques for emotional psychological healing. Now, what's surprising to me is that even though I saw that be helpful, there were certain areas where it didn't help at all. And to do with relationship was one of the key areas where I knew that I still had blind spots, that none of this stuff was really helping. And I suppose, the good side of that was it kind of spurred me on. I knew there was something that I hadn't seen, that I hadn't understood. But on the other hand, it was also frustrating because they seemed to promise more than they could deliver. It seemed to me like I'd done enough work on myself I kind of knew enough. I felt like I was reasonably conscious enough about my background and my issues and this sort of thing that it ought to have really helped. And yet there were still struggles in my own life. It was still difficult for me to spend much time with my parents without getting in a bad mood, without getting upset with them. Still have fallouts with my partner, which would escalate into unholy rows sometimes, and things like this. I felt it didn't feel right somehow, and it was only in a relatively recent time, through learning these principles of how we actually create our experience on the inside, then finally things started to slot into place, and finally things started to fall away, which I'd been kind of working on trying to make fall away for a long time. They just seemed to fall away by themselves when I wasn't even looking, which was even more remarkable to me.
So interesting, and I love the way that you put that across. And what would you put that down to? That falling away of those old problems?
Well, there's still an element of mystery in that. I can't explain how, for example, I could fall into a pattern of behaviour, whether it was with my dad or with my wife, which seemed to have been going on for years. And one day, suddenly, without having done anything different consciously, I could see the potential for falling into that pattern, but I didn't go there. So it was almost as if the element of choice had suddenly been introduced into the equation. But I didn't do that, or at least I didn't consciously do that. And so to me, it has to do with, we've already alluded to, just learning how we create our own experience. Somehow, it's as if it gave me a little bit of distance between what would normally be my just reactive mode, just getting into reaction. I could see that I was headed that way, and I could see that I could go some other way as well. So suddenly, there was like, oh, I don't have to. And sometimes I would just go that way anyway, just to see, It's almost like, stepping into the same old pool that you've stood in many times. I'll just try it one more time. It's like, no, I really don't want to go there. And I suppose it sounds kind of ridiculous when I say it now, but it just no longer made sense to, for example, to get into a bad argument or to start defending some point of view or something, when what I started to understand was that I want to get along. I want to be at peace. I want to have a nice relationship. I don't want to be in a conflict situation. If wherever I see that there's a possibility of choice, I'm going to choose peace. And that's really what changed for me, was that I saw that option existed. Whereas before, I knew that it existed theoretically, but I didn't see how I could access it in the moment.
And I guess what I'm really curious about is, because I understand you now teach others and share these the same understanding with other people. I'm really curious, has this had the same impact with them, and what impact are you seeing with other people in their relationships?
Absolutely. This is one of the commonest things that people report back. And I mean, I openly share with people, if they ask me, well, what's the benefits of learning what you're teaching? One of the things that will be top of my list would be, I say, well, look, if it didn't have any other benefit than the impact that it's had on my personal relationships with the people that I'm closest to, I would have settled for that. I'm quite upfront with people. That to me was worth anything that I've spent, any investment of time, because it's been so impactful and so helpful. But people often tell me, and again, what they often report is that they hadn't even necessarily been looking for improvement in this area. And suddenly they found things shifting in relationship to a partner, in relationship to the children, in relationship to someone at work, or I had one person tell me, who worked with me for a little while, she said, I have a new husband. I said, well, congratulations. And she said, well, no, it's the same guy. What she was trying to say was, I'm having a completely different experience of my existing husband. And I don't really know how that's happening, but I'm so grateful. She was just coming up to me with such gratitude that after all these years, she was having a completely fresh and new experience of her relationship with a partner. And to me, that was the most heartwarming thing. And it's not a one-off. I hear variations on this over and over and over again, is that people find a way to connect or to reconnect with the loved one. They find a way to rekindle the love and the affection, which seem to be getting buried under a lot of other things. And also people find the possibility of relating in a new way, even with people that they've known for a long time, which to me is very exciting, because again, it's not something that I can't teach anyone how to do that. I couldn't even teach myself how to do that, but it seems we have the built-in capacity to do that when we start to get more present and we start to let go of whatever the conditioned ideas and beliefs and thinking that we had, that we were bringing to whatever the relationship happens to be. When that seems to start to fall away, which it does quite naturally, people start to show up freshly, and they start to be able to relate from a very, I would call it a much more authentic place, and because they're relating in real time now. I started to see how I could often, the source of conflict in my relationship was that I was relating to my idea of who this person was, or who I wanted them to be, or who I wished they were, or who I wished they weren't. It was all these ideas. I wasn't actually seeing the person as they actually were.
So what would you say to someone who was like, well, that's great, Ian, but how do I get more present?
Yeah, I know. It's the $64,000 question, and there's people who will give you a technique, power of now, and focus your mind and all of that. But what I love about this, when we talk about these principles, it's an understanding. It's not a technique. So in that sense, it's not a how-to, and it seems to me that the understanding itself, when you start to see how what looked like a source of conflict in your life was coming from somewhere outside of you. As soon as you start to see that's not the case, it was an illusion. It looked that way, but it wasn't actually true. So you see through that, and you see beyond that to the truth. And the truth of the situation is that whatever ill feeling or disturbed feeling that you've been having was actually coming from within you all along. So it's just helping people to see that we are the source of our own distress, and we're also the source of our own good feelings. And as soon as you kind of hold up a mirror for someone for long enough so that they can see that for themselves, anyone who catches a glimpse of that it starts to reorient them in the direction of having nicer feelings, at least more of the time.
So would you say that for everyone in a relationship, that you point them to the fact that no one, including their partner, can make them feel any particular way?
Yeah, I might not always put it in those words, but often I will point to exactly that point. It would be a question of helping the person to see that whatever they would name as the source of stress, the source of worry, the source of being upset, typically we'll point outside of ourselves when we talk about those kind of uncomfortable, disturbing feelings. It's just helping the person to sort of get quiet enough for long enough so that they can just get reflective and actually see, even if it's just for a moment, they can say, wait a minute, I'm doing that to myself. I'll give you an example from my own life, which I think, to me, it's the only way that we can really put it across and help people to see it. So some time ago, my wife used to smoke, and more than I would approve of, which means more than one, right? and for me, I would hold that up as a source of my irritation, and I felt completely justified in that. It's in my mind, I've got all this judgment about it. It's a filthy habit, and setting a bad example to our son, and making a horrible smell on my clothes and all the rest of it. So it was something which I had judgment about, and consequently it would become a source of conflict in the relationship. And one day something really, really strange happened. I found myself getting myself into the usual state of being angry and upset about my wife smoking, and building up a case about it. And so at some point it just occurred to me, out of the blue, that wasn't the reason that I was really upset. That actually my anger in that moment didn't have anything to do with the fact of my wife smoking. And the proof of that was the fact that she wasn't even in the house at the time. In my mind, I was upset because she was smoking. And yet I suddenly realised, if that's really true, she'd have to be at least sat here with me smoking, and she's not. She's miles away. So I just saw something. I thought, well, there's only one thing that can be upsetting me. It has to be my own judgmental thoughts about the fact that she smoked. I mean, she may or may not be, but it's not impinging on me directly right now. It's only my thoughts about it that's impinging on me now. And that shifted something for me. Now, it's still something, if you ask me, well, do you like it now if people around you smoke? Not particularly. I'm not a smoker, so, it's not something I'm particularly keen on. But it's from that moment it started to lose its charge. When things have an emotional charge for us, it's like you can't be around it without it evoking some reaction. Suddenly the charge started to shift, and I felt it almost immediately. And it was just from seeing that what I thought I was angry about wasn't actually what I was angry about. It was the thinking itself, the act of thinking about what it was. That was what was creating the angry feeling in me. And that's just the shift that we're helping people to make.
And what would you... Because one thing that a lot of people talk about in relationships is, relationships depend on good communication. Communication is the key to relationships. And it sounds like what you're saying has a really close relationship to how then people end up communicating. And I'd love to get your thoughts and tease something out on getting a gap in terms of your thinking and then how that relates to communication.
It's a great point, because I've even done, I've done workshops in the past helping people to improve their communication in relationships. So it is something I can speak about. And what I didn't see at that time was I kind of had it the wrong way around, because when we're not in a harmonious relationship or even a harmonious life situation, essentially what that says to me now is that we're not in a good feeling state ourselves. That's really all it says. And whenever we're not in a good feeling state, we're going to look anywhere for anything to try and improve that. So if it looks to me like I'm not in a good feeling state because I'm constantly falling out with my spouse or my boss at work or whatever, then I'm going to look for techniques to try and improve the flow, to try and improve the rapport, to try and communicate better. Maybe I'm going to do some assertiveness training if I feel like I'm being trodden on a little bit, or I'm going to do something to boost my confidence. And what I see now is that all of that is kind of it's compensating, if you like, for the fact that we're feeling that there's something lacking, that there's something not right, there's something missing. And if you could just turn that equation around and say, well, how about you just had all the good feelings that you've been looking for? Let's just forget about communication, forget about confidence, forget about all of that. How about if you were just in a good feeling right now? You can say this to anybody. Whatever problem you think you've got, if you just forget about it for a moment and just imagine you're having the best day of your life, right? You're having the best day of your life. You're completely at peace with yourself, feeling that there's nothing that you need, there's nothing that you're short of. You've got 100% self-esteem, There's really nothing to worry about in this moment. If you just enter into that space within yourself, now, what problems do you have in that moment? What kind of problem would you have communicating from that place within yourself? And anybody who kind of plays along with that starts to see very quickly that actually they wouldn't have the communication problem. If you felt completely at ease and okay within yourself, and you felt like you had good, healthy self-esteem, you would just relate honestly, you'd communicate honestly from that place. And you wouldn't be too upset about whether the person heard you perfectly or didn't, or whether you got your point across. So it wouldn't be so important to you, because you'd just be open and honest, and you'd also be in a good place to be listening and receptive to what the other person was saying. So to me now, the communication improves naturally as a side effect of understanding.
And it occurs to me that the opposite is true. But we aren't in a good place, like you said, and you kind of pointed to.
Yeah.
That it looks like it's a communication issue, a rapport issue, a confidence issue.
That's it. That's when communication goes out the window, or suddenly it becomes very difficult, or it suddenly starts to look like nobody listens to me, nobody takes me seriously, nobody respects me. All of these kind of appearances in terms of how other people react and respond to us, they all start getting magnified when we ourselves are not in, let's say, in right relationship to ourselves. And that's exactly it. And the reverse is equally true. As soon as we settle down, we calm down, it's literally as if we're looking at the world from a different perspective. The person can say the same thing to you on one day, and it feels like they've mortally wounded you with their words. They can say exactly the same thing on another day, and we say it's water off a duck's back. You just wonder what kind of a bad mood are they in today. You don't take it personally. And what's changed? What's changed is where you're speaking from and where you're listening from within yourself. It doesn't have anything to do with the other person.
So what would you talked about then words going as water off a duck's back, and could you talk a little bit about forgiveness?
Yeah, again, I think forgiveness has become something which it's almost become a practice for people. It's often recommended. You got to forgive, and I trained in several techniques some years ago where forgiveness was a key part of what I actually trained in. So I was working on forgiving people in my own life for years, and truthfully, it didn't really work. It felt contrived to me, and I think there was some sort of secret part of my mind that said, well, actually, I don't really want to fully forgive that person, So it was becoming a source of more conflict with myself. Well, I'll forgive that, but I don't want to forgive this. So that didn't work for me. Where trying to forgive as a practice was something that was being recommended. What I found, again, through understanding is that you only need to forgive if you're holding someone else responsible for your own feeling state. So if I maintain the idea that I'm in a bad place now because of the way let's say my father treated me when I was a teenager, as long as I hold on to that, then forgiveness is going to look like at some point it's going to look like a necessary thing for me. If I'm going to have peace, if I'm going to have closure, I'm going to have to forgive him, whether I want to or not. So it's tied in with that idea of, when we hold someone else responsible, then forgiveness becomes necessary. But if we don't do that in the first place, if I take self-responsibility for my own life, really, if I see that actually it's only me that's holding on to something that's giving me a bad feeling, and my dad was just doing the best that he did with what he knew at the time, then forgiveness then it's almost an irrelevance. It just happens automatically. And in my own example, like with my father I'm talking about here, I saw with him that actually there wasn't anything to forgive. I just thought there was. I had several imagined things that I thought that he'd been responsible for, that I needed to either somehow put behind me or forgive him for. And when I saw that it was me that was making that up and maintaining it in my own mind, and then suffering the consequence, I wasn't interested in forgiving him anymore because there was nothing to forgive. I just realised I'd been seeing him through a particular filter, and it was that filter that I was holding on to that was hurting me. It wasn't anything that he'd done. So the forgiveness for me was, I rarely see the need for it these days because, as I say, you take responsibility for your own life and for your own feelings. Then as soon as you stop blaming anyone else, then you don't need to add forgiveness to take care of the blame, as it were.
Yeah, I love the way that you put that, and I kind of had a similar realization recently where I felt like, oh yeah, it was all about forgiveness, and then I kind of had this insight around, oh, but why would I need to forgive? And it was kind of a whole, like you say, it feels like it's totally different.
Yeah.
Rather than a practice of having to do that.
Yeah.
It kind of no longer makes sense.
And it's funny, because I think that's why intuitively some part of us rebels against the idea of forgiveness. Because I've noticed that with a lot of people that I've worked with, is that a lot of people have a kind of unease with it. It becomes something that they feel they should do, rather than something, if it naturally arises, all well and good. And I think it often does and maybe needs to. But when it becomes something that you feel you have to do, or you should do, or you ought to be able to do, something in you is rebelling against that, and probably for good reason, for the reason that that you and I are talking about here, is that we probably know deep down that the only reason we think forgiveness is necessary is because we've made up some idea of what someone did to us. And as soon as you get a glimpse of that, the game's up,
You said something around there was no need to forgive because people are doing the best that they can do with what they understand at the time.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit, because I think that could be really, really interesting.
Well, everybody knows about what we call the wisdom of hindsight, where we can look back at a situation which was very difficult, say at the time. Maybe we went through a really tough time with, let's say, with a particular person or in a family situation. And we can feel traumatized by it. We can feel that it was, we shouldn't have had to been put through that, whatever. And then certain years hence, we can look back and say, you know what, it happened, but I still loved them. And, we can even look back and say, well, compared to people that I know, it wasn't so bad. And we can even look back and say, well, actually, I'm grateful for some of those experiences because it's helped to make me the person that I am. So we can go like a 180-degree turnaround. We can go from wishing something hadn't happened to actually being thankful that it did happen, because we've seen that it was helpful in our own growth. So what that speaks to me of is the fact that there's no one way that we can see anything. It seems that in a given moment we can get very fixated on there being one way, and whenever we do that, we tend to get stuck in a certain viewpoint. That is often the reason why we suffer, is because we're holding a person or ourselves to a particular version of who they are, or a version of who we are, which was historical. Maybe a person did treat us badly one time, but maybe they did it once, and then for the next 10 years, I've been treating myself badly on a daily basis, and thinking that it's them doing it. And that's kind of insane when you really start to see that. It's kind of crazy. You say, well, isn't it enough that they treated me badly one time? Why would I want to keep adding to that? But we have to see that it's us doing it. I saw this some years ago. There's a psychologist who was one of the post-Jungians called James Hillman. And I had a quote from him which, when I read it, it kind of burned itself on my brain. He said, if you're still hurting over something that happened when you were 12, it's the thought that's hurting you now. And when I read that, I knew for sure that was true. I didn't altogether like it, but I knew it was true. Because it spoke to me very clearly of this self-responsibility that I'm talking about, that things in our past cannot touch us except to the extent that we keep thinking about them in a certain way. And at any moment, we can wake up and have a new thought about something. And when we have a new thought about something, we have a different perspective on it we have a change of feeling about it also. And it goes for anything. You know, people have forgiven people who murdered their child, for example. Don't ask me how, but they came to a place of peace within themselves because they realized that they didn't want to live in a place of hatred and bitterness for the rest of their life. You know, they saw that actually the compassionate thing to do to oneself is to let that go. It's not about forgiving another person so much. Very often it's being able to have enough compassion for yourself and say, well, you know, just as my growth in understanding goes along, then we behave better as we understand more about ourselves and about how life works. Well, if that's true for us, that's true for everybody. When I say we only do the best we can with what we have, what I mean by that is that all of our behaviour comes directly out of how we feel in the moment. Whatever particular feeling state and state of mind we're in, that's what we behave and act out of. And we've all done bad things. We've all done horrible things that we've regretted afterwards. You know, even if it's hurting someone with words or verbally or whatever it is. You know, we've let people down in various ways. Well, when you see the impact of your own actions, maybe you have some insight about that, and subsequently you're in a similar situation, you act differently because you've got a deeper understanding now. But you didn't have it then. So, you know, we can't go back and we can't turn the clock back and behave in a way that we could behave now. So to me, this is the birthplace of compassion, is when we truly see that everybody, literally everybody's doing the best with what they know. Even people who are doing things that look crazy to us now. You know, I don't have to look back in my own life that far and see that I've done crazy things too.
Yeah, you and me both.
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, obviously there are relative scales, and it's always easier to judge the people at the extreme end, you know, and say, well, yeah, well, I haven't done anything as bad as that. Well, there, but for the grace of God, you know. To me, I look back and I say, well, I'm fortunate that I didn't do anything as bad as that, because I know I could have. You know.
So, for people listening to this, is there any one thing that you want to leave them with, to improve their own relationships, or something that you'd want them to leave with?
I think for me, one thing that helps everybody, or potentially can help anyone, is to be open to the idea that you don't really know, and you will never really know the totality of another person. And to be open to the possibility that even the people that you think you know very well, that actually they could still surprise you in pleasant ways. You know, that there's whole sides to people that we don't see, we don't experience. And the reason we don't is because we've got a bunch of preconceived ideas about who we think that person is, and who we think we must be in relationship to them. And if just for a moment, you know, if you could just put that to one side and just meet that person as if you were meeting a pleasant stranger on a train. You know, imagine you had a chance encounter with someone and you never met them before, and you find them interesting, you know, and you get curious and you start to discover things. I guarantee you, everybody that you think you know could surprise you and could show up freshly for you, and that can be the beginning of a whole, you know, discovery of a whole new way of relating to anyone.
Well, thanks, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We're going over time, so we'll have to end it there. But for anyone who wants to perhaps reach out to you to get in contact with you or learn a bit more about what you're up to, how might they do that?
The website's probably the easiest, Kush. It's theinsightspace.com. People can have a look at that, and they can also email me through there, and there's a phone contact on there as well. So if anybody wanted to get in touch that way, I'd be very happy to hear from them.
Fantastic. And people can get hold of me as usual via my website of ankushjain.co.uk, on Facebook at facebook.com/ Ankush Jain Ltd, and even on Twitter at Ankush K Jain. It's been an absolute pleasure, Ian. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to the listeners next time.
Thank you.